Hey everybody, Matt from Eastwood, and welcome to another live tech session in the Eastwood garage. For you guys that haven't watched one of these before, we like to broadcast on a number of platforms for you. So we broadcast on YouTube, Facebook, and also on Eastwood.com. You can watch it as well. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, you can watch this and chat live. So as always, we have Scott over here, who's our lead tech.
So if you guys have any questions, make sure you put them on Facebook, YouTube. I'll be able to answer them here, or I can always shoot them over to Matt. So let's see some welding.
Cool. So today what we're going to do, we do these periodically. It feels like it's been a little while since we've done the last one. But we usually try and do an intro to TIG welding. It seems to be something that Scott and the techs are always getting questions about. First-time welders that buy our TIG welder, and they maybe need some advice on setting the machine up or technique, or maybe they think there's an issue with the welder and it may just be a technique issue. So I like to just give a crash course. So we're going to do maybe 15 minutes or so on doing a weld. We're going to show you under the hood. Joe has a fancy little setup with the lens where we'll show you under the hood. Today we're going to be using the Eastwood TIG 200 AC/DC machine. So this machine is kind of a stripped down bare bones machine as far as having blinky gauges and all the fancy bells and whistles, but what it does have is it has exactly what you need to put down nice welds. It's not confusing the setup, which is nice. So I'm going to give you a rundown of the front of the machine, how it works, and then we're going to jump right into doing some welding for you guys. So on the front of the machine here, there is a power or amperage dial here. And what this is used for is only on this particular machine, only when you're using the finger switch. There is a finger switch on there that's a set amperage switch. You would use this dial to set that. If we're on the foot pedal like we are today, there's actually an adjustment on the pedal itself, so we'll be using that. Underneath here, there is a PreFlow dial. So what the PreFlow dial is this puts out gas before it actually initiates an arc. So by setting this in fractions of a second, like right now I have it to 0.4 seconds, so a little under half a second. I have my PreFlow. So what that's going to do is it's going to purge the line and the nozzle of any contaminants possibly that could be in there. It's also going to give you a little bubble around where you're starting the weld, so that when you first start the weld, you're not shocking the metal with no shielding gas and you get a dirty weld from the beginning. So this is important. Usually setting it somewhere around half a second or under in most cases is okay. Sometimes if you're doing stainless or aluminum, you may need to turn it up a little bit more just to give you a little extra help. Post flow is kind of it's what it sounds like. It's at the end of the welding process. So after you're done welding, this is a little different than MIG welding or stick welding, where you just pull your hand away, you're good to go, and everything's great. With TIG welding, you actually want to hold your nozzle over top of the weld and allow the post-flow gas to flow over the weld until the weld fully turns from a liquid state till it turns to a solid. So this is measured in full seconds. So right now I have it at about 3.5 seconds on this. Anywhere from 1.5 to 3 seconds is acceptable or most common. I rarely ever turn it up much higher than that, but again, sometimes when you're doing aluminum or some other instances, you may turn it higher, and that's totally okay. But if you crank it up much higher and you're just doing some mild steel like we're doing today, you're going to be wasting some gas because you don't need all of that post flow necessarily. Over here we have our switches. So this is the foot pedal and panel control. Panel control means you're using the dial here on the panel, and you're using the finger switch on the actual torch there. Get it above the graphics there. So the little finger switch that comes on the torch, this switch is just basically an on-off switch. So if we set it to 110 amps, we're going to get an instant 110 amps, and that's what it's going to stay at. If you don't like this switch, or you want to just use it only in occasional instances, it just comes zip tied onto the torch, and there's a plug on the other end, so you can pull this out, roll it up, set it to the side. I myself like to use this switch kind of for a grip when I'm holding it. I think it's kind of nice to hold it for that, and then I'm not cutting it off. Then over here, the last two switches is DC and AC. So depending on what you're welding, the type of material, you would switch this. The most common thing is for steel or stainless, you're going to be using DC. If you go into aluminum, you're going to be using the AC side. other switch here is for the TIG and stick function. So this welder we've added, after some requests, we added a stick function to this. So you can flip this switch down, you can plug in a stick welding lead into there, and you can stick weld if you need to weld without gas or do something remotely where you can't get, you need to weld outside, you can use that. And the last style that I forgot about here, and isn't really, we're not going to get into it today since this is a beginner's demonstration, is the clearance effect. This is basically, in few words, the AC balance control. So you're going to dial this knob depending on how you want to manipulate the arc, and you can play with that a little more. If you guys want to learn more about clearance effect or AC balance control or welding aluminum with this welder, we have a bunch of videos on the YouTube channel. Eastwood Co is the username. If you're not watching on YouTube, you can look it up, and we got a bunch of great videos on that showing that process. So that's the machine itself. The gas over here, we're using 100% argon. And a common mistake that we have that I like to cover is these gauges that come standard with the machine. This is your tank pressure. This one over here is actually your flow coming out of the torque or out of the tank into the machine. So what you'll notice is there's two sets of numbers here. The number you want to be going by is the CFH number on the inside. And that number is about double of what the outside numbers are, which is pounds per minute. An often mistake that we get is in our instructions, we tell you a number which is 10 CFH or somewhere around there. And what people do is they end up putting or 10 to 20, and they will turn it by this one on the outside. So if you turn this up to say 15 CFH, if you want to go in between 10 and 20, you're at 15 pounds per minute. If you're reading the outside, you're almost double of what you want it to be because CFH is about 30 at that point. So make sure you're reading that inside number. I usually set it at around 15 or 20 when it's at rest. So then when I'm actually welding and there's gas flowing, it's going to drop me down to 10 to 15 while we're actually welding. So right now it's at about 20. It's going to drop down to probably 15 when I'm actually welding. So that's about where you want it to be. Anything above that on just standard, welding joints or normal steel, you're probably wasting some material, gas, especially if you're all the way up here on the gauge. So that's a little tip if you guys are just starting out. Make sure you're double checking and you got your settings just right. So we're going to flip this on, get my gloves going here, and I'll show you a quick little demonstration on just setting up a puddle. Joe's going to get in here close, and if you guys have any questions after I run this first puddle, Scott is going to throw me any questions that he thinks are good to answer on camera, and he's of course answering questions live for you guys as well. So I'm going to get the helmet on here, get ready. And you just have to bear with Joe for a minute. He'll just have to get set up with a lens. He has to slip over the end of the camera, and then he can focus and get the shot here. So yeah, so I'm going to go on the top here first just to show you guys running a short little puddle, and I'm going to talk you through the process. And you let me know when you're ready, Joe.
Ready.
All right. So I'm going to hit the pedal. A little bit of gas came out before the puddles, the arc initiated. And I'm letting it sit here. I'm going to take it a little slow just so Joe can get it a nice shot here. So you can see a puddle starting. We start to see it turning into a puddle, and it's opening up. I'm putting the pedal down slowly. Now it opens up. I can add filler rod. And you move about half the puddle distance, you add filler rod again. And you dab. And it sort of takes away how much filler it needs. So you don't really need to shove it in too hard unless you're trying to fill a gap or something like that. But for what we're doing here, you're just putting it at the front of the puddle, front leading edge, and you just move along slowly or quickly once you get better at it. But you can see I'm just dabbing it at the front of the puddle, and it's taking just a little bit off the filler rod. And then when you get to the end and you're ready to stop welding, I'll put one little dab on and I'll start backing the pedal off to a lower amperage. Let it sit and dance a little bit. And then I let off the pedal, let that gas flow till you hear it stop. Then you can take your hand away. All right, so we'll let Joe get in here and you can see, and I'll show you just on this actual puddle. I didn't have anything to go by here, so I'm got a little bit of a snake effect there. But what you can see, if he gets in close, you can see the actual puddle here. And you can see each of my little, do you need me to turn that a little bit for you? There we go. So each of these little dabs and me moving, you can see each of those. So you can kind of diagnose your weld afterwards by just looking at each of the puddle. If you have a big jump, you might have moved too much, or if there's a hole, you might have moved too much, and that's why there's a hole in there where you didn't add filler rod, but you moved. So should be fairly flat on the metal to get the proper penetration. I was moving a little slower than you would normally if you were welding something, an actual weld joint. But that's the process for starting to weld. Any questions we have so far?
Oh, there we go, get my mic on. There's a really good one that's on here. It's a step above, but going into multiple passes. After the first pass is over, would you let it cool, clean it before you go into the next passes, or would you go right in while it's still hot?
If I'm welding something that is that I want the heat in it, for instance, if you're welding something that's really thick, that you want that heat in it, because sometimes usually when you're doing multiple passes, it is something that's structural, that is thicker. You need that heat in it. You may even preheat the part before you start. So generally what I do is I go right back into it. So I might wire brush the bead, clean it off if any that I need to, and go right back in it and keep welding. If you let it cool down all the way till you can, it's cool to the touch, and that part is obviously going to be pretty thick, you may not get the penetration you need, or you're going to have to preheat the part once again and go back into it. So most of the time I just work it hot and keep working on it. Now if the part is something sensitive where you may not want, you're worried about it harming it or warping it or doing something like that, then you may want to let it cool, and that's a different instance. But for anything structural or thicker, I generally do kind of go right back into it. I just, like I said, I'll clean it with a wire brush or something if it needs it, and then go back in. That's a good one.
The only other one that's on there, I apologize to Joe because he had turned around. I said I didn't have any more, but it's hard to see on there. About how far are you holding the tungsten away, if you can describe to him?
Sure.
From the surface.
The quickest way, if you guys are learning how far to hold the tungsten away, Joe can probably get in here. The way I teach whenever we do beginner classes here at our location, a good way if you're practicing is to put your filler rod on the ground, on the table, and put your tungsten just above your filler rod. That's about right. That's a good way to just get it set. So I'm using 1/16 filler rod here. So I'm keeping it just a hair over 1/16 above the workpiece. If I go closer than 1/16, what happens is when I put that filler rod in there and the split second before it flows out into the puddle, it may touch the tungsten. So you want to keep it just a little higher than what the actual filler rod is, so it gives you a little room for the filler rod to get in there and then flow out. You don't want it to sit on top and then touch it, and then it melts it. And melts it to the tungsten, then you got to regrind it. You get upset, and then it just goes into a downward spiral. Good. Anything else? That's it. Good. Cool. Thank you guys for asking questions. We're going to do a little bit more at the end there. We're going to let you guys have some questions again. So another thing I'm going to show you before we do our next welding an actual weld joint here is you need to practice feeding the filler rod. A big mistake that I see with beginners is they hold the piece out like this, and you can just see with me, I'm just moving my hand a little bit, it's bouncing the filler rod. So when you're trying to weld, it's extremely difficult to get in here like this and weld, because your filler rod's going to be bouncing all over the place. It's going to hit your tungsten. It's hard to control. You want to choke up on the filler rod and enough that your hand isn't in the actual weld, but so much that it's not actually coming off of it's not bouncing around on you. So what you need to do, the way that I'll put my hand down here, I use my first 2 fingers here and I pinch the piece the filler rod between my fingers like that. And then I go over top with my thumb here just to use as a guide. And I grab, let off with my thumb, grab with my thumb, and just do that, kind of like a crab claw almost type effect. So you want to be working your hand just like that and feeding the filler rod. So if you guys are just starting out, it's really good. I always tell beginners, sit at home if you're watching TV or something like that, or after you're done in the garage, bring some filler rod in and just sit there and practice feeding the filler rod. That's probably one of the hardest things for beginners once they get past the process of starting an arc and not touching, is they don't have good control over the filler rod and they can't get the filler rod in at the right time. So that's good to practice. That's the way that I feed filler rod. That isn't necessarily the holy gospel, but that works for me. You guys can try that. You may use a different technique for feeding the filler rod. As long as you can feed it smooth, that's what matters. And last thing I'm going to show you guys before we do the next weld is the actual, oh boy, the actual what's inside of the torch here. So this is the assembly after it's unscrewed from the torch. And what we have here, I'll take my gloves off. So we have our collet here, and this has little slits cut into it, right there. And that allows it to clamp down on your tungsten when it goes through here and keep it tight. That's why it has those slits in it. Then we have the collet body here. On the standard one that comes with the TIG 200, this has little holes. There we go. Seems like everything we do is tiny little stuff. There we go. So little holes drilled in this, kind of like you would see with a MIG. If you take apart your MIG, similar kind of idea. So the gas is flowing out through the nozzle and comes out there. It's inside of the cup here, which threads on. So when the gas comes out, it bounces around inside of there and then comes out and flows over our workpiece. So it's going to flow out up in here in the cup and then just come out onto the workpiece. So that's the basics of how this works. Not too difficult. These parts don't really go bad. The only time that this stuff here goes bad is if you drop and shatter this cup, or if you put too much heat into the piece, or your shielding gas flow is too low. It can actually make these things get brittle and crack. I've seen that before. But generally, if you take care of them, they will last pretty much forever. The other pieces don't really go bad as long as you don't abuse them. So that's how the torch, the front of the torch actually goes together. Any questions before I get into another? We're going to show doing a lap joint here.
What was the one? Oh, there's a good one here. So somebody had asked, if you're welding vertically, would you start top to bottom or bottom to top?
Oh, we get that question all the time.
Yeah, it's a good one.
For TIG welding, I kind of just start with, depending on what the part is, top to bottom is good. Generally, I try, if I can, I will start that way. But it really depends on what you're doing. As long as you have control over the puddle and you can get proper penetration with the TIG at least, I've gone either way. But you just got to see what you're comfortable. I mean, the most important thing with TIG welding is making sure you're comfortable so you can get a nice weld. So if you're doing that, just kind of look at the piece, make sure you do a test run with your hand, see how you can get in there, and then make sure that if you're doing, obviously gravity is going to be fighting you. So if you're going top to bottom, either way, you got to be making sure that you're moving quick. You get in and get out. Now I'll tend to pump the pedal when I'm doing that, or if we're using our digital machine, I'll turn the pulse on so that it just gives me the heat only when I want it to add filler rod. Good one. Anything else? All right, we'll do questions one more time at the end, but what we're going to do now is Joe's going to show you under the lens one more time. And I'm going to do a little section here on doing a lap joint so you guys can see. We often get questions about, is it easier for me to turn like this for you?
Yeah, that should be good.
Okay. It's going to be a problem, isn't it? I'm going to try not to hit Joe with the filler rod, so I'm going to have to contort myself a little. Right there. All right, so we often get a little piece of dirt there. There we go. Joe's getting smacked with the filler rod. All right, So a big question we get is when doing a weld joint with beginners is how to get your puddle started. Do you start on the top, the bottom? Do you aim in the center? And what I do is I grind the tungsten to a point. I'm going to try and stay out of the camera here. This is always the tough one. And I focus more on the bottom piece, especially if it is thicker than the top piece. So I'm focusing right in that valley, getting the puddle going, and I stab the pedal. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually pumping the pedal, so it's giving me heat right when I need it, until I get a little heat into the workpiece. Then I can start backing off a little bit. So you can see I'm kind of aiming for the bottom there. So I'm putting the puddle, mainly the heat, more on the bottom so I can keep that top edge from getting cut away too much. Alright, and add a piece. And what you want to do is come off of your center, your weld seam a little bit, like that. And slowly back off the pedal like we were saying. And then keep your torch over the weld area. And then the gas stops, and we're good. So what we're going for is you're trying to keep the top edge, and Joe can get a shot of that. You're trying to keep our top edge from getting cut away too much. So what we don't want is we don't want a big undercut where it's going way back into here. Because we're trying to keep that edge from getting cut away. So I mean, just a little bit there. It's just a little tiny, ooh, a little wavy. There we go. Leaned on the table too much. But you can see we're keeping the puddle right in that valley there. And nice close dabs together, so that way that we're not getting any overlap, any spots that there's holes or anything. And then you can see here at the end where I just took the puddle and terminated the arc off of the actual weld seam. So what that's doing, it's kind of just a little safety thing so that you're not getting a crack or anything down the center of that. So we're taking that puddle off to the side and letting it bleed off, and then letting off of the pedal. So that's doing a weld seam. This is a good one to practice on. A lap joint is a good one to practice on. I just tack it up and go. Doing a T-joint is another one that's good, but you just got to spend time practicing. And even if you're pretty good at welding, TIG welding, you still got to practice. Occasionally keep your game up. Any questions, Scott? That's all I got for showing the basics and techniques.
Yeah, one quick last one here. If you accidentally touch your filler rod to your tungsten, what is the remedy for that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so I should mention before let me get this out of the way. All right. I should mention that we do have a bunch of videos that are much longer. I'm trying to just keep this a short bite size, so I didn't go as in depth as I always do. But you do have videos on YouTube that we show literally the whole process, and I go into depth pretty far into all this stuff. But what you need to do is if you touch, a couple things that can happen. If you touch it to the base metal, or if you happen to touch your filler rod to the tungsten, or you didn't clean your metal enough and it happens to spit or pop on you where you go over some dirty metal, what you need to do is you have to stop, pull your tungsten out, and use either a bench grinder, dedicated bench grinder for grinding tungsten, or you can use a belt sander and use a particular area, and you need to sand it and take any of that extra material off and then regrind the point to your desired shape. So you need to do that. That's, again, something that beginners oftentimes don't want to do. You want to just keep welding and welding and welding, and it'll just get worse. Every time you touch it or you get it spits back on you with dirty metal, it's going to make your weld puddle get bigger and bigger and bigger and out of control, and you're going to get more frustrated. So a good thing for beginners, I would say, we sell packs of 2 of the E3, the purple band tungsten. Buy a couple packs of that, so there's 2 in each. So you get yourself 4 or 6, and what I like to do is grind either side. So if you got 4 or 6 of them already ground there before you start, that way you can just pull it out, put the other one in, and you can keep welding and get a good amount of time welding. Then you just stop and regrind all of them. It's a little easier that way than stopping every time and pulling it out, and you'll get away from that temptation to use tungsten that's contaminated. So that's a good one.
All right, so the last thing we have is actually not a question, but also Matt did a great demonstration on starting TIG welding, but if Joe can get down, we also have a digital TIG welder we just came out with recently that he's going to pan down to. So this is going to be able to do everything that the one that Matt has can do, and then some. It still can do the steel, it can still do the aluminum, but now you're going to get the features like the pulse control, so you don't have to work the pedal. It's going to have 2T and 4T, so what 4T is, just a quick, easy explanation. With the finger control, like Matt said, on the other one, it's either on or it's off. With this one, with a couple settings on the machine, you can actually make the finger control act just about like a foot pedal. So in your awkward positions, welding something in, and people have laid down welds, you can't even tell we're not done with a foot pedal. So I mean, certainly keep that in mind, and there are 5 presets on it. So if at any point you think you get the machine out of whack and you're a little bit worried about, is this welder too much for me, just go right back to one of the presets, it'll bring it up. And last but not least, you can save 15 presets of your own. So once you dial it in, you find something you really like, just save it and pop it right back up. So not to take away from Matt, but wanted to show that it's a good option for someone who maybe wants to take that next leap into TIG welding. So that's about it though from over here. So thanks for tuning in, you guys, and check back with us every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
All right, guys, thanks. I appreciate it. If you guys have any suggestions for future broadcasts, make sure you drop them in the comments, as I always say. We like to hear your feedback. If you like a certain particular style of video that you see, whether it's us doing a project, teaching how to weld, or you just want to learn about new products or something that's back in stock, let us know what style you'd like. We'd like to see that in the comments, and we'll try and do the best to get those going. So thanks, guys. Have a good weekend, and I'll catch you guys later.